Okay, I'll now demonstrate how to blend the sky in this shot with the land in this shot that I took shortly after sunset, and that has a lot of detail and very little noise. And blending two images like these can be more difficult because obviously the sky in this shot is much different than the sky in this shot, and therefore I'll have to be pretty precise with my blending to get a seamless blend. But once you get good at blending images like these, it opens up a lot of possibilities. You can then take a stitch image of the sky and a stitch image of the land and blend those together. You could do a focus stacked image of the land and a stacked image of the sky and blend those together. And the possibilities are really limitless. You can combine many other techniques that I've discussed in this book, and then in addition to doing those techniques, also blend images of the land and of the sky. So you can really focus just on getting a really good image of the sky and focus on getting a really good image of the land, and then later combine those two. And so the first thing I'll do to blend this image is drag this layer so it's separate from the layer below it. And with the Move tool selected, I am going to shift click and drag this image onto the image below it. Now I can close this file, and this layer ended up way at the bottom here. I'm going to drag it to the top so that none of the other adjustments affect that layer. And I'm actually going to hide all of these layers that I made last time except for the sky, as I only want to blend in the sky from this image. And so I'm going to change the opacity of this top layer to 50%, and that allows me to see the image below it. And now I'm simply going to drag this layer until it's about aligned with the layer below it. And I know Photoshop almost certainly won't be able to align them because these images are just too different. And so I'll manually try to roughly align these. And it looks like I'm going to have to rotate this image clockwise. So I will hit Control T. And this would be Command T on a Mac, and then rotate. And I think that's about as good as I'm going to get it. The images don't align perfectly because when I stacked all these images of the sky, it distorted the foreground. So I'll click the check mark. Now I'll pull the opacity back up to 100% on this layer. And I want to mask out the sky on this layer so that the sky below shows through. And so I can do this first by selecting the sky with the Quick Selection tool. And I'm actually just going to get rid of the tree in this image. I showed 2 videos back how to blend in trees. And since that can be somewhat time consuming, I will just get rid of this tree here since it's little. Of course, if you do want to include it, you can refer to the previous video where I did explain how to blend in trees. And so I'm now going to expand the selection just a little bit to make sure that it overlaps the arch by just a little bit, and that will make blending the images easier. I'm going to go to Select, Modify, Expand, and enter Expand by 1 pixel. And so you can see that made the selection overlap with the arch and give me just a little bit of room for error. And so now that I have that selected, I'm actually going to inverse the selection so that I'm just selecting the arch. I'll go to Select, Inverse, and now I will create a layer mask by clicking on this mask icon. And you can see that it has masked out the entire sky except for this upper portion here, and that's because this image didn't extend all the way up. And so I can expand this mask by simply painting on it. I'll select the paintbrush. I want to make sure the opacity is at 100%. Then I'll simply paint over the top of the sky until the sky is completely masked out. And so now you can see that the blend obviously isn't perfect because some of the arch from this below shot is showing through. And so the easiest way to get rid of that is to simply clone in more sky in this area. So I'm going to do that by first selecting the sky layer, and then I will go ahead and duplicate this layer. And now, since it's still a smart object, I can't clone on it. It won't let me clone. And so what I need to do is rasterize this layer by right-clicking on it and selecting Rasterize Layer. And again, this basically flattens it and turns it into a normal layer. And I do still have the smart object below it in case I ever need to go back to that. But now that I've rasterized it, I can start cloning. And I'll set the opacity at 100% and the hardness at 0%. And now I'll simply start cloning in sky in the problem areas. And normally when you're cloning stuff in Photoshop, you'd want to use like the hilling brush, as it can make a better blend. But with something as simple as the sky, I can pretty easily just clone using the cloning tool. And the one thing I just have to be careful of is that I don't get too many repeating stars in the image. And I don't need to worry about cloning over the arch because the arch here is on a separate layer, so I'm not affecting that layer in any way. And I'll also need to get the underside of the arch here. And I'll go ahead and just get rid of that tree. Okay, so that's already looking a lot better. I do see that there are some issues on the arch itself with a little bit of fringing and some chromatic aberration. And so I can do the same thing on this layer with the arch. And I'll go ahead and duplicate this layer as well. And then I can hide this layer below it and just go back to it in case I ever need it. And now I think I'll change the opacity to 50% to make each adjustment a little less extreme. And then with a little smaller brush, I'll kind of go over this area here with the fringing. And even some areas where it's just a little lighter at the edge, I might want to darken. That can make it look a little more natural against the night sky. I think that's looking good. I don't have to be overly precise. I may have actually been too precise there because I was zoomed in at 400%, and so any minor flaws really won't be visible. And so now I've successfully blended these two images. And now I'll want to adjust the foreground and the sky separately until I get them to look a little bit better together. Since these were shot at such different times, the colors of the foreground and sky can appear a little odd and mismatched. And so the first thing I'm going to do is try and adjust the colors of the foreground and then the colors of the sky until they basically look better together. And this is certainly more of an art form than a science. And so I'll start by creating a color balance layer. And if I were to just make adjustments on this layer, it would affect the entire image. And since I only want it to affect the arch, I'm going to right-click on this layer and select Create Clipping Mask. And this ensures that the adjustments that I make only affect the layer below it. So now you can see it's only affecting the arch. And I might go ahead and warm up the arch a little bit because it's looking a little bit too cool. And I can do this by dragging this slider to the left to increase the yellow. And I'm thinking maybe I'll bump up the red a little bit as well. And that is looking better. I might now create a levels layer and just darken the whole image to where it's closer to how I'm going to want it to be. And that can give me a little better idea of the colors. And so I think the arch overall is looking pretty good. I'll go down to the sky and I will again select a color balance layer. And in this case, since this layer is below the layer with the land, any adjustments I make will only affect the sky and I don't have to make a clipping mask. Now the sky is looking a tad yellow to me, especially compared to the arch, so I think I'll move this slider to the right to cool it down and add a little more blue. Okay, so this is a definite improvement. I think this looks like a more natural image than I had before. And so now I'll take and zoom in on the images to show you. And this is at 300%. And you can see that the quality is pretty darn good, especially considering that I had taken this 7 years ago with a camera that is now completely outdated, and new cameras can get images with much less noise. But this shows that even if you don't have the best camera, if you stack images and or blend images, you can still get very good quality images. And of course, if you're using a better camera, the quality is going to be even better still. And one issue with this image is there's quite a bit of coma and stars in the very corners. Because I used a rather expensive and fast lens from Canon, but I found out later that it's really not very good for night photography, as it does produce a lot of coma. So I later found much better lenses that are quite a bit less expensive, and I go over these in my book, and you can also find out the gear I recommend at gcollier.com/gear. So that definitely would have helped this image a lot. In this case, I would just need to clone these stars until they actually look like stars instead of birds or mosquitoes or whatever they look like. And so I would go through all of these stars and just make sure that none are looking too bad. And so that's how you can blend two images that are fairly different to begin with and get a pretty natural looking shot. And like I said before, this opens up a lot of possibilities for different ways you can blend images.